The night of secrets with my ex would ultimately seal the fate of my marriage. As the sun set, casting a warm, golden glow through the sheer curtains of our bedroom, I stood there, my heart heavy, staring at the empty space beside me on the bed. It was a space that once held warmth, laughter, and the gentle breathing of Sam, my husband. But now, it served as a cold, empty reminder of what we had lost. I remember the day I first felt the shift in our relationship. Sam's eyes no longer sparkled when I entered the room, his touch had become mechanical, lacking the passion we once shared. It felt as if he was physically present but emotionally absent, lost in a world where I no longer mattered. That's when the loneliness crept in like a silent intruder, filling the void he left behind. In this vulnerable moment, I turned to Daniel, my ex. Our past was tangled with fiery arguments and intense reconciliations, yet I sought solace in his company. When I reached out, desperate for connection, he welcomed me back into his chaotic world filled with art, music, and life, so different from the sterile environment I had grown accustomed to at home. One evening, after too much wine and shared stories of old, Daniel introduced me to his dog, a large, friendly beast named Max. It was a night that spiraled in an unexpected direction, one that unfolded into an act of desperation, a search for something raw and real. The next morning, as I left Daniel's place, I was enveloped in guilt, yet oddly liberated. I thought I could hide the truth, that this moment would be my secret escape, my rebellion against the numbness of my marriage. But secrets have a way of growing larger in the dark. A year passed, during which I nearly convinced myself that my night with Daniel was just a fleeting moment of madness. Then Sam confronted me. Somehow, he had discovered the truth. The pain etched in his expression shattered the trust we had built over years, leaving it in pieces at our feet. The silence between us was deafening, an unbearable weight that slowly suffocated any words I tried to utter. Sam's gaze was heavy, pinning me to the spot. He didn't yell or scream, instead, the silence was his weapon, cutting deeper than any words could. I felt the gravity of my choices spiraling us to a point of no return, and in that moment, I realized we were both falling into the unknown. I needed to breathe, but the air felt thick and suffocating. His voice was a mere whisper, yet it echoed in the emptiness of our room. He turned and walked away, leaving me with the remnants of our life together, scattered like ashes after a fire. The days that followed blurred together. Sam moved out, taking only what he needed and leaving behind the life we had once built. I navigated through the remnants of our marriage, each room a testament to what had been. The kitchen, where we once cooked together, felt cold and uninviting. The living room, once filled with laughter as we watched movies, now echoed with silence. Desperate for distraction, I threw myself into work, hoping the routine would numb the pain. But each evening, as I returned to an empty home, the weight of my solitude crashed over me like a wave, forcing me to question my choices. This emotional turmoil led me to Daniel. Was it worth it? The thrill of the moment had long faded, leaving only regret and a hollow feeling in my chest. One evening at a local cafe, seeking solace in the crowd, I spotted Daniel sitting alone, his usual vibrancy dimmed. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I considered joining him. However, the gravity of what had transpired kept me rooted in my seat. Sensing my hesitation, he looked away first. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sam, asking to meet and discuss the divorce. My heart plummeted at the finality of that word. I agreed, knowing this conversation would seal the fate of our relationship. As I prepared for our meeting, irony gripped me. I was about to discuss the end of my marriage, all because of a secret I carried in shame. Guilt and sadness washed over me, a heavy reminder of the betrayal I felt towards myself and Sam. We decided on a neutral cafe, somewhere we never frequented. I arrived early and chose a table in the back, the ticking clock amplifying my anxiety as I awaited his arrival. When Sam finally stepped in, he projected determination, but pain flickered in his eyes. We sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady yet low. "I think it's best if we handle this amicably, Susan, for both our sakes." I nodded, unable to meet his gaze, barely managing to whisper an agreement. We discussed our assets, living arrangements, and separation logistics, but the weight of our shared history lingered between us, a silent acknowledgement of what we were losing. As we navigated these painful logistics, the air hung heavy with all the feelings we could not voice. He suggested we handle this amicably, for both our sakes. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. I agreed. Our conversation circled around assets, living arrangements, and the logistics of separation. Yet beneath the surface simmered an undercurrent of pain and a shared history that couldn't be easily discarded. As we finished making our plans, I realized that the end of our marriage transcended mere infidelity. It was about the gradual erosion of love, a silence that had grown louder than any argument, punctuated by choices made in the shadows of our discontent. When we parted ways at the cafe, the weight of our conversation lingered like a heavy fog. Stepping into the cool evening, streetlights cast long shadows, mirroring the darkness enveloping my life. The thought of returning to an empty house felt suffocating, compelling me to wander aimlessly, each step echoing the emptiness inside. My mind replayed moments with Sam, the subtle signs of our drifting apart that I'd ignored. The night spent alone, even with him beside me, struck me hard. I realized I had been seeking an escape long before that night with Daniel and Max. I found myself standing outside a small, dimly lit bar, a place where tales of heartache and redemption were likely shared. Pushing open the door, I welcomed the change from my usual silence. I ordered a drink, scanning the room not for company, but for distraction. At the end of the bar, I noticed a woman. Older, with eyes revealing a depth of life experience, she caught my attention. "You look like you've seen better days," her voice smooth and comforting. I managed a weak smile. "You could say that. I'm Evelyn," she introduced herself, extending a hand adorned with rings steeped in stories. "Susan," I replied, shaking her hand and feeling an unexpected connection. Evelyn listened as I poured out my story, not the details of my infidelity, but the loneliness and the sense of invisibility in my own marriage. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a knowing sadness. "Sometimes we look for warmth in the wrong places," she remarked, her words striking a chord. Her presence offered a strange comfort, as if she could see through my facade. "It's never too late to find where you truly belong," she added, and her words resonated deeply. In focusing on the betrayal, I had overlooked the void I was trying to fill. As the night wore on, Evelyn shared her own stories of love lost and found, of mistakes and redemption. Her tales, more about survival than triumph, illuminated the journey of learning to live with one's choices. It was a revelation that my search for connection didn't have to end at betrayal. Perhaps this was just the beginning of understanding my life's choices anew. I've learned that sometimes the hardest part isn't the fall, but picking yourself back up. Her words resonated with me as I left the bar, the crisp night air brushing against my flushed cheeks. I walked home, seeing the world through a new lens, not as a justification for my actions, but as an understanding of the complexities of human emotion and the desperate need for connection. The next morning, I resolved to confront not just the aftermath of my infidelity, but the root causes of my discontent. I called Sam, not to rehash our separation, but to express something I hadn't before. "Sam, I know this might not change anything, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I'm sorry not just for what I did, but for not truly seeing us, for not fighting for us when we needed it most." There was a long pause on the other end, the silence heavy with our shared history. "Thank you, Susan," he finally said, his voice softened. "I think we both have some healing to do." I understood then that our conversation didn't mend our broken marriage, but it opened a door to understanding. Perhaps one day, we would find peace with our past. I knew the path ahead would be hard. Personal growth often came with pain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for reconciliation, but for self-discovery and redemption. As I hung up, I looked around the house. Now just a shell of what it once was, its emptiness offered space for something new, something real. I realized my broken marriage had shown me that I could find peace with my past. The days following my conversation with Sam were a strange mix of relief and turmoil, oscillating between moments of clarity and deep despair. The house, once filled with our life, felt like a mausoleum of memories, each room echoing with the ghosts of our shared history. I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air might clear my mind. The streets were quiet, the kind of silence that amplified the sound of my own footsteps. As I walked, I suddenly spotted a familiar figure up ahead. It was Daniel, walking his dog, Max, toward me. My heart skipped a beat, not out of desire, but due to the complex web of emotions that had tied us together. Daniel noticed me, and we both paused, the distance between us heavy with our shared secret. "Susan," he called out, surprise mingling with caution in his voice. I nodded as I approached, and Max stood there, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. I bent down to pet him, his tail wagging, the warmth of his fur contrasting sharply with the coldness I felt inside. "How are you, Daniel?" I asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "I've been better," he admitted, a sad smile crossing his face. "I guess life goes on, but it's not the same," he added. We stood in silence for a moment, unspoken words clinging heavily between us. After a while, I finally broke the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about that night, Daniel, about us and what I did." He looked away, then back at me, his eyes searching mine. "I've thought about it too. It was unexpected. I'm sorry if I pushed you into something you weren't ready for." "It wasn't just you," I replied, my voice steady. "I was searching for something, anything to feel alive again, but in retrospect, I realized I had been looking in all the wrong places." Daniel nodded, his gaze probing as if to ask, "Do you think you'll ever forgive yourself?" I took a deep breath, the weight of my actions heavy on my shoulders. "I'm trying," I replied, "but it's more than just forgiveness, it's about understanding why I made those choices, and why I felt so lost." He stepped closer, his voice a low murmur. "Maybe we both need to find a new path, Susan, one that leads us to where we're meant to be, not to where we've been." His words resonated within me, echoing Evelyn's sentiments from the night before. I sensed a flicker of resolve beginning to kindle. When we parted ways, I felt a shift, not just in our relationship, but within myself. My encounter with Daniel wasn't about reigniting an old flame, it was about extinguishing it, closing a chapter that needed to end. Back home, the silence in the living room felt less oppressive. I picked up a photo album and flipped through its pages, not only recalling the happy times, but also noticing signs of our unraveling. Some smiles seemed forced, while others felt distant. The doorbell rang, breaking the spell. It was Sam, standing there with a box. His expression was unreadable, a blend of determination and something softer. "I brought some of your things," he said, placing the box down. Feeling the need to talk, I led him to the kitchen, where we sat at the familiar table, the same one where we had once shared breakfasts and dreams. The air around us felt heavy with unspoken words. "Sam," he began, his eyes betraying his nervousness, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said on the phone regarding not fighting for us." I nodded, prompting him to continue. Perhaps I had stopped fighting too. Maybe we both had been searching for something we thought was missing. His admission washed over me like a tide, its truth was undeniable. "I think you're right," I whispered, my voice catching. He looked at me deeply, really seeing me for the first time in a long while. "I'm not saying we can fix this, Susan, but understanding why it broke can help us both move forward." The room buzzed with a new energy, one of understanding, not reconciliation. "I've been thinking," Sam continued, gaining confidence, "about what we lost and what we might still uncover, not in each other, but within ourselves." His words hung in the air like a poignant reminder of our shared journey. I admitted that I had been so focused on betrayal that I had failed to see how we both contributed to the emptiness. Reaching across the table, Sam's hand hesitated before gently touching mine. "I found something in your things," he said, pulling out an old journal from when we first met. As I read some entries, memories washed over me, dreams, plans, and the love we once had. Tears filled my eyes as I remembered the excitement of our first date, the promise of a bright future together. "I forgot all about that," I whispered, the past flooding back. "We were full of life," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe we can find that again, not with each other, but for ourselves." The atmosphere shifted, and the room transformed into a space not just of loss, but of potential growth. "I want to start over, Sam," I said, "not with you, but with me. I need to discover who I am without the weight of our past." He nodded, his eyes reflecting a blend of sadness and hope. "I think that's what we both need, to find our own paths to heal, and maybe to forgive. As the conversation unfolded, we ventured into areas we had long avoided, discussing our individual dreams and the parts of ourselves we had neglected in the relationship. Sam shared his desire to travel and explore the world, something he had always postponed. I spoke of my wish to go back to school and pursue a career I had once shelved. I shared my wish to return to school to pursue a career in art therapy, a passion I had buried under the weight of my marriage. The climax of our story wasn't marked by dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation. Instead, it unfolded in a quiet moment of profound understanding, where we both acknowledged the end of our marriage and the beginning of our individual journeys. "I want you to have this," Sam said, sliding a journal back to me. "Maybe it can remind you of who you were and who you can still become." I accepted the journal, feeling its weight, not just of paper, but of our shared history. "Thank you, Sam, for everything," I managed to say. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "I'll always care about you, Susan. I hope you find what you're looking for." As he left, the door closing behind him felt like the final chapter of our shared narrative. Yet, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I realized this marked the beginning of my own story. The house, once a symbol of our broken dreams, now appeared as a blank canvas, ready for fresh strokes of color and new tales waiting to unfold. The heart of my infidelity wasn't merely about the act or its discovery, it was the deeper realization that life, love, and self-discovery are continuous journeys. Sometimes, the most significant growth stems from our deepest falls. With the journal in my lap, I felt a new resolve to repaint my life with colors of my own choosing, refusing to let past mistakes define me and instead allowing future possibilities to guide me. In the weeks that followed, the house began to change. I started by clearing out remnants of our past, not just the physical clutter, but also the emotional baggage that had settled into every corner, every piece of furniture, and every photograph. Each item I removed symbolized a decision and a step toward reclaiming my life. I enrolled in art therapy classes, seeking solace in the creative process. The studio became a sanctuary where I could pour my emotions onto the canvas. Every stroke became a release, each color represented a step toward healing. The other students, each with their unique stories of pain and recovery, turned into a sort of family. One evening, after a particularly intense session, I lingered in the studio, being the last to leave. The instructor, LLA, with eyes that seemed to see the unspoken, approached me. "You've been pouring your heart into your work, Susan," she observed, her voice both gentle and firm. I nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze. "It's therapeutic," I admitted, managing a half-smile. "It's more than that," LLA replied, settling beside me. "Art has a way of revealing our truths, doesn't it? What do you see in your paintings?" I glanced at the canvas before me, a tumultuous mix of dark and light, chaos and emerging form. I recognized a journey, not just one of loss, but of rediscovery, of understanding the choices I had made. LLA nodded, understanding the complexities of the emotions I was conveying. As I began this new chapter, I understood that what I was creating went beyond mere art. It was a reimagining of myself, a declaration that I was ready to embrace life on my own terms.